Yeah. I'll tell you, it'll come out. Yep. All right. Find yourself a seat. It's going to be a little bit packed today. I should close these doors symbolically because we're not doing Sunday school for the older kids today. But there's some seats over here, and strong people can stand if they need to, but there's 5 chairs on the wall over here. Good morning. All right. So we are going to offer a prayer today, not for education, because this is not quite an educational class today. This is a review of the 2025 APA visit to India. When I say the APA visit to India, the Anglican Province of America, not only our diocese but the province, has a mission board. Bishop David Haynes, of course, is the missionary bishop and ex officio, the head of that board. I am the missionary bishop assistant, so I'm on that board too, and there are others on that board. But typically when the bishop travels somewhere, I go with him. We have 4 global partner churches. That is, you hear us pray for them every week: Haiti, Philippines, Ecuador, and India. They're called partner churches because we are the Anglican Province of America, not the world, the Anglican Province of America. And politically, we partner with other churches. They are autonomous, but we assist them, and we have a relationship with them. The bishop in India decides to do something, Bishop David doesn't have jurisdiction to tell him not to. So it's a different kind of relationship than, like you'd say in the Roman Church, where the Pope has authority over the whole world. We're partners. It's essentially what you'd find in the larger Anglican ethos of polity, where there's a church in England, but England doesn't rule over, Pakistan or something like that. They're sort of like colleagues. So essentially, our colleagues in India, we do assist them financially and in prayer, and they pray for us too, as you'll discover. So it had been, let's say, since 2017, since a visit had been able to happen. COVID and the bishop's illness basically interrupted all potential travel, but we finally were able to make it happen this year, and here is the report of what we did after we pray. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty and most merciful Father, we thank you for all of your goodness and loving kindness to us. We thank you for giving us our church, of which there is one, and you are the cornerstone. We visit our brothers and sisters truly in the rest of the world, and we ask that you would bless this time today and help us to recognize these Christians on the other side of the world as our brothers and sisters, and those that we will spend eternity with. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. All right, so we visited 17 churches in the amount of time that we were gone, and I've determined there's no way for me to explain all 17 churches to you. And so what we're going to do is we're going to mash them all together into one conglomerate church and tell you what one of those visits was like, show you a couple, and tell you a couple stories afterwards. I thought there's really no way for me to even really go through the trip in the amount of time we have, other than to tell you initially, here we are in India. This is Bengaluru, which is in the southern portion of India, where that's possible when you're visiting churches to go to Hyderabad, which is further up north, but it's about the same distance as Bangalore or Bengaluru in this area right here. Over the course of our journey, the flight left from the United States on January the 7th, but the way the world works and the way flying works, we arrive on the 9th. In Bengaluru, the first item of business is to get a car, first of all. But once you get a car, which took an extra day, by the way, if you rent a car from Avis in India, you get a driver with it. And your driver receives, as a part of your payment for the rental car, a per diem for room and board. So whenever you want to go somewhere in your car, you text Shankar and say, Shankar, we'd like to go to such and such. And he says, right there, sir. He opens the door for you, takes your bag, puts it in the back. And that's what you get when you rent a car from Avis in India. But not here. You don't get a squat when you get here. But communication with Avis was not great, and so the rental got jumbled, and you can imagine if you're a rental car company trying to find someone who can spare 10 days in a row to travel with you, that's not that easy either. Found a driver, Shankar, he was wonderful. Kodagu, which is right here, further north of Bengaluru. We spent a few days visiting churches in that area. The cathedral is in that area, or is in that town. Next portion of the trip was to Tirupati, which is a much larger city, sort of like the central metropolis of Andhra Pradesh. We spent more time all the way down to about here. We drove quite far on days, but always returning to Tirupati. Portion of the trip was in Surulurpeta, over on the coast, and this is where the Bishop Richard currently lives, the bishop of our churches in India. He lives there. So we spent a couple days there before driving back along this southern route, which is a major highway. The major highway from Chennai to Bengaluru is like the interstate, but the rest of this is like country roads. So it was pretty rough travel, except for this last portion home. That was back to the airport, and then our flights home to the frozen state of South Carolina. So anyway, that's the general route of our trip. Using those cities or towns as bases, we went out and visited several churches, and usually 2 a day, sometimes 1. But what I'm going to describe to you is what a visit in those churches was like. But first of all, I have to say, when you arrive in Bengaluru, India, you find Krispy Kreme donut. I promise you that's the only Krispy Kreme donuts I saw in the whole. But I thought, picture. Typically when we'd show up at a church, and in most countries that we visit, they're very fond of printing these banners. And so they take these digital photos. This picture was taken by my daughter in our bedroom. I mean, in my wife and I's bedroom, and they, cut it out and superimpose it on so it looks like I'm descending from the sky. With Bishop David Haynes and with Bishop Richard, his name is Richard Rajesh Kumar Panem. Richard is, like Rajesh is kind of the name he uses so that the Indians will understand, because Richard is not a very common name. So he was born Richard. So anyhow, this is typical of visiting any of these churches. There'd be a banner announcing our arrival. What I call the team, or the Sarita translator, whose name is Pastor Swamidas. Pastor Swamidas has been translating for us since 2011, when Father Johan was the Vicar General and doing this missionary work. He established the relationship with Father Swamidas, or Pastor Swamidas, and he's been an extreme help in India ever since. Much of the work that we'll see in these churches is a result of the good work that Father Johan did when he was in India arranging things. So it's kind of a cool thing. Somehow from St. George's, you have 2 people that are visiting these churches. It's interesting thing. The rest of the people in the picture here are locals from this particular church. And then this is Bishop Jaya Rao's wife, Rebecca. Bishop Jaya Rao is the father of Bishop Richard, who passed away during COVID while we were gone. So this is our first time visiting since the death of the previous presiding bishop. And you'll see a little bit more about that in a minute. But typical upon arrival at a village, you would receive a flower. They don't call it a lei. That's Hawaiian. What is it called? A garland, I think. You put a garland around your neck. And then there is a processional, a parade, essentially, complete with drums and sometimes fireworks. And you'll see sometimes a golden chariot drawn by 5 golden horses, which, now that was a new one for me. Parade through the village, not uncommonly, you parade past the Hindus. And the Hindus are looking at you thinking, this is those Christians. This is the thing, hello. I've gotten in the pattern of doing that even now. It's not a religious symbol or anything like that. It's, when you wave your hand, they think that's weird. But if you put your together, everybody does that. So when we go by the temple, we go like that, and the Hindus will go like that back to us. They're saying hello. Christianity was, and Islam was somewhere near Christianity, and Hinduism was everywhere where we were at. So, that's a great question. We were in Andhra Pradesh, and it was, my guess would be something like 70% Hindu, 15 Muslim, 15 Christian. Some you'd see a mosque once in a while, you'd see a church once in a while, and you'd see Hindu temples everywhere. So, we'll see if the audio works for this, but nope, doesn't work. Awesome. Some of you have struggled with audio before. Anyway, this particular visit, they performed, there it is, in our honor. How weird. This is a traditional South Indian dance with sticks, and if you think they're not having fun down there, they're having fun. So it was an interesting event. Flower petals being thrown, garlands where they know how to welcome a guest and have fun too. So, but that's I can't remember. Is it Kolamata? I think is the name of the dance that they do. Sometimes it's a welcoming thing. But as you're making this procession, there's a great to-do about the special guests. I thought that was wild until at 2 in the morning in Jamalamadugu, the first night, 2 in the morning, I heard the drums because another special guest had arrived for some other event. It wasn't just us. That's how you welcome a special guest. You have a parade, you bang on the drums, you play horns, and everybody's used to it. So at 5 in the morning, the call to prayer goes out from the mosque. So it's a different world. But generally, great excitement about special visitors, and so oftentimes more people from the village would come out than would come to the church. Nevertheless, excitement. A parade, here's the golden chariot carrying the special guest. It's a little tractor with and you can see me a little bit resistant to this. Like, what are we doing? And but you know, flower garlands, and we just went basically from one end of the street up to the front. But the drum processional, the petals, the garlands, and they really know how to do it up in India. So that was my first time being drawn chariot with 5 golden horses, but I don't see why you all couldn't do it here. Here's this is more typical. Any of that stuff. But when you get to the church, typically the church is a small little building, no air conditioning, no any of that kind of stuff. The women did not dress up for us. They're always dressed up. And amazing variety of garb where I don't think I ever saw 2 patterns repeated between one woman and another. And it doesn't matter how poor the village is. They are all dressed immaculately in saris and similar garb. And from behind, you can really get a sense of how much the what do you call that, textile industry in India is quite alive. So this is a typical scene. They would put the guests of honor up to the front, and the church would gather and sing. First thing to do is to sing, and there's always a mic, no matter how small the room, microphone and amplifier. It's common, and it's a sign that basically the church has it together. If your PA system isn't working, it means you don't have it together. And so to have your PA system working means we've truly welcomed our guests into the best that we have. So they would work quite hard on getting the sound system correct, which 100 years ago would have been the thing. This is a different church, but as a service typically would go, we'd start singing, and then Bishop Richard, this wasn't a Eucharistic service, we're visiting several churches on midday services, so he would get up and lead the church, the visitors, the guests, and the translator, and then he would the microphone to Bishop David. Bishop David would introduce and they're visiting all these churches, one to his ministry as bishop in India, following Bishop Jaya Rao. They don't need to wait, and so they accepted him quite readily. So typical would there be some singing, and he would offer a prayer or a prayer and an introduction. Father Swamidas would translate into English to Bishop David and I. And then when Bishop David, well, actually I would get up and say something, and he would translate into Telugu, which is the language that everyone was speaking, and very little English in the churches, very little. So I would get up and say a couple things and make sure that my message was shorter than the bishop's, because the bishop would come up next and address the congregation and say something about the season of Epiphany, and sometimes say something about their particular situation, because as we'll hear a little bit later, churches were suffering one form or another of persecution, not just poverty, but persecution, and largely from the Hindu community. Not everyone, but some. So we would sometimes tailor the message that we delivered to the congregations depending on their circumstances. Just so you notice, women would typically sit from the altar the right, and the men would sit on the left. So whatever tradition that descends from, use. Conservative culture, actually, there was very little affection or bawdiness or anything to the collar, and the films and posters and paraphernalia and all that around to the common culture in India. After messages would be given, typically sit us down, and as their way of honoring, they on a chair at the front of the church, put a special cloth over our elder, or give a flower bouquet to us, clap, and so, well, at every church I was an honored guest. My eyes look a little wrong in this picture, but so every single one of the churches gave. It's really nice, and they're all just as varied as you can possibly believe. With fantastic dress for a developing country. It's amazing what kind of textiles exist. I believe it's wool, but it was all in Telugu, so I don't know. I would guess it was silk, but it seemed to have a word like oswold or something like that, like wool. I just know that you probably can't throw it into your washer and dryer. It did not about. But the latter portion of the service, we would be honored in that way. And then after the honoring, people wanted to be blessed by both the bishop and myself, a special prayer given for them. I found this to be significant because in the history of Hindu culture, there are people in the lowest castes which are famously untouchable. So for someone of visually high-ranking position from a Western country and lights come and be constantly laying hands on and praying for these people, no matter who they were, no matter what their situation. I think that has something to do with the reason in which each person wanted and wanted to be prayed for, even if they didn't understand the words that were being said. So this was a common scene at the end of each of our visits, families coming forward, a line of people wanting to be for, which is lovely. It was really a wonderful thing. And then afterward, pictures. They wanted pictures. So technology has really changed India, as I understand, even from what technology has changed the culture in India quite a bit, so that everyone has access to the whole world, which wasn't a thing before. We're often late visiting the churches because of some inconvenience, and it used to be that the village would be waiting for hours and hours for us to arrive. Richard is able. And so the local parish, they're on their way, and then they come out. So it actually is quite helpful, and we don't feel bad when we arrive that people have been waiting for us, because delays were frequent. An interesting thing, a couple of churches there, cake, and this is something you would never see in our church, is a cake, and especially a Happy New Year cake. So at the end of one of our visits, they had this Happy New Year cake, and they wanted to cut the cake up, and this is the tradition. People want to cut the cake and put it in your mouth. Resisted, but in the end, I did have a piece of cake shoved into my mouth a couple of times. But an interesting thing about a New Year cake in a church in this area, actually in this state and in this province, day cake to organize, consider valid. So to receive a New Year's cake, it's only going to come from the government. From the government means we're legit in this place. And to show the cake to everyone, and to everyone have a piece of this cake, we're government. So it's a big deal. So to have the first piece of New Year's cake shoved into your mouth is a special thing, but you have to kind of roll with it. So this was a not uncommon to see. You see, the churches are dressed, which sometimes means Christmas lights, and you see inside the church, oftentimes things hanging from the rafters, as colorful and as special as they can possibly make this room. You know, we wouldn't, dress up a church like this, but this is the best thing they can offer there, and it actually is beautiful. And I will say, when the wind blows through the room and the ceiling does a little shimmer, there's something there, I'm going to say. Kind of special. I don't mind it. Not recommending it here, but it's their stained glass room. The ceiling is blowing back and forth, and it's shimmering. The room is shimmering. It's special. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Sometimes after community elders would have something they wanted to talk to us about. This is a particular parish in which they had they were considering purchasing a piece of land and moving the church to this spot, and they wanted to talk to the bishops, like the men pull the bishops aside and say, what do you think of this plan? You know, a little bit of business. Also, sometimes, actually only one time, we presented an icon carved by Jean Rivard to the bishop in the cathedral. And it's funny to have the Happy New Year symbol behind the altar. We would never do that here, but you start to understand why they would do it there. The New Year is a big, has there in terms of legitimacy for the church. So, but the icon was presented to the bishop, and Bishop Richard was beside himself, happy that he was presented with something that someone had clearly worked so hard on. And my father was very happy that someone was so thankful to receive something. So it was a mutual cycle. It was good. It's a good thing. We would depart from the parishes, and typically people would be standing there waving and ready for us to go. So that's what a typical visit was like. But some of the churches that we visited, I'll just make a special point to encourage you by their witness. So here is a church that we visited that had undergone a significant bit of persecution. Father Joseph and his family were forced to leave the apartment that they lived in because of the work they were doing as a church. This had put up a sign saying church, and the community made them take it down. They changed their name from church to prayer house, and eliminate their PA system, because a PA system means something, and they don't want those Christians to have that communicated to them. So the service was a bit of a whisper and under a bit of a, careful. We're in a community where we're not welcome. So we don't know what it is to not be welcome in a community. I mean, we do, but not really. But this is a fantastic man. He still goes back in the place where he meets in to have smaller church services with them. I tried my best to get these girls to smile, and I achieved it. So they have a selfie that is previous. But I'll tell you, if you think that people there under persecution are sad sack or down, it's not true. They're very determined. It's an inspiring thing to see. Here's another church that we went to. This fellow owns property on a tribal land, and the community in the tribal land where he had a church that he owned, that he was meeting in, they commanded him to leave. So that house, and there was another sort of feeling of, we're not really in our home, we're not really able to welcome these foreigners into our home. We're in a separate place. Potentially, if they didn't, there'd be trouble. So they left. Room full, wall to wall with people. They're not undeterred. But here's another good pastor in India who was not afraid. Here's another church closer to this one on the road somewhere. They also were approached by the community and told to take the cross down off of their building, and told to change their name from church to prayer house. This kind of mild persecution had subsided. He climbed back up and put the cross back on the church, and of all. So, and I promise you, I have received ever so slightly more hearing damage from some of these churches. But what it means is not that they don't know how to control the volume. It means we're here. Listen. They want the whole community to hear. We're here. We're here. We're not afraid. It's pretty inspiring. Larissa, do you have a question? Not that I could tell.
Like with the background,
Yeah, not that I could tell. There was no organized persecution. There are, as I was told, 600,000 villages in India. And the cultures, and really there are, I think, 1 billion people there. They say India isn't really a country, it's 10 countries. And so it's just like someone saying to you, I've been to the United States, I went to Seattle, I loved America. And you say, Seattle? You don't even know, in India, it's that times so much more. So when you get down to the village level, what it really takes is someone at a particular temple or to say, we don't want them moving in, let's get together. So they got to, I don't think there's any order that comes down from on high, because the order from on high at the political level is, well, that's hard. That's changed in the last few years. There's more of a Hindu nationalist government in place, and they kind of want Christians out. Officially, you're not allowed to convert in India from one religion to another. You are registered in the religion that you were basically born in, and you're not allowed to convert, and we're not allowed to try and convert anyone. It's a very different setting over there. So some of these people that are willing to do the work are being quite brave by going out and spreading the gospel. Each property has a wall around the property, and we would never do that here, but the wall is a legal boundary. People aren't allowed to come in that wall and mess with you. So as long as we're visiting people within the wall, the property wall, we're fine. And people know not to cross the wall to mess with you, because now it's a whole legal thing, So churches that don't have a boundary wall are kind of vulnerable. There's one that asked for help. Could you please help us build a boundary wall around our church so that we'd be protected? But here's another brave pastor. His family standing around him in congregation, happy as anything to welcome us. Here's another fellow. This is a pretty inspiring story, and it's closer to the end of what I'm going to present to you today. But we went to visit his church, and while we were having our lunch, he was able, through translator, to kind of tell us some of his story. So he said that when he was a young man, he was the persecuting Hindu. He was an adamant and fanatical Hindu, and he had a little business set up at the. He sold bangles or something like that. But when he would be one that would, let's say, violently persecute Christians that he could find. He had an arranged marriage with his wife Hannah, who was also a Hindu secret Christian. All the stuff and all the stuff she was supposed to, but she did not believe this. At some point in her life, she had learned about Christ, and she said, I am not a Hindu, I'm a Christ follower. Their arranged marriage came together, and though he was a violent man and difficulties with alcohol, he learned of his wife's Christian faith and was converted himself and turned from the persecutor into a baptized Christian and persecuted. He was approached when they had a church that they'd started and told to leave this place, and they had to meet on the roof of someone's house for a while. When we went to visit them this time, 2017, they were meeting on the roof of a house. 2025, they had their own big, beautiful church. So they had persisted through the persecution, but we could not help, as we were listening, but to liken, yesterday was the Feast of the Conversion of St. Paul. This is exactly the story of St. Paul, who was a persecutor of the church, who was knocked off of his horse, converted, and became the persecuted. But the thing about these folks is fear had no role. When he was a Hindu, he was not afraid, and when he was a Christian, he is not afraid. Not afraid of persecution, not deterred, not set aside, not quieted. Pretty inspiring. So he and his wife Hannah were just the sweetest couple, but you could see it in his eyes. You were not going to budge him from his position. He'd already been through the fires. What are you going to do? What are you going to take from me? I don't have anything.
Bob,
Yes.
how do these pastors get their theological training?
That's a good question. We would desire for them to have master's degrees in theology. It's just not available. So Bishop Jaya Rao had developed something like a seminary or a college at the cathedral and would pull the clergy together to have seminars to help them understand and learn Christian theology. That is an area that we were working on when we were there. Some of you, all of you, who've been to the confirmation class with me, have done The King's Highway by George Carlton. We're working hard to get The King's Highway by George Carlton translated so that they can use it. Google Translate does some miraculous things. Your cell phone can translate some miraculous things. So, working through basic systematic theology and all that. But they have a basic Christian faith and a basic Christian ministry that is sufficient if you consider how well trained, even the apostles were, the fishermen, and St. Peter wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but when the Holy Spirit was working in him, he was bold and ready to preach. So there's some bold folks ready to preach. Education is a hard thing to accomplish. Here's Father Niranjan, who is in a church, a young guy who's in a church out in, basically all the churches we went to were in villages, and this one was in a farming community and not a village, like out. Looked a lot like this. So these are, I'm told by Bishop David, some of the most ancient mountains. I'm always fascinated with mountains. Cambrian era, does anybody know what that means? I don't know. Yes, old. So these mountains are worn, and we saw lots of boulder formations, which fascinated me. At the bottom of the boulder formation are the rice paddies, where the farmers are working. Well, all these farmers in these rice paddies out in the country, there's a little church. But he traveled to all different places and farming communities to preach God. It's just amazing. Young guy, young family. So, as per usual, they asked for prayers, and Bishop offered prayers for them. And so, some inspiring scenes from those churches. We also were able to visit the grave site of the previous presiding bishop, Bishop Jaya Rao, and this is the first time that his widow, Rebecca, had received a visitor from the APA who had helped her husband so much. And so some kind of closure was, I think, I'd like to say. And yeah, she's, like any widow, how long does it take to get over that? Forever? Yes, so it's a moment for her. This is the tomb of the Most Reverend Dr. Panam Arthur Lawrence Jaya Rao, presiding bishop, Anglican Church of South India, our partners. And his son now is the bishop, duly elected. I know it's like, it's not a dynasty. All the clergy elected him. So when visiting these churches, you find a variety of inspiring people. Here's a young guy who is the youth leader and worship leader for, worship leader means he's and just a fantastic fellow with his sons in one of the village churches. Every time we went and visited a church, Christian or Hindu, the kids would run out to see. So here's a gang of trouble from one of these churches. I can't say I taught them the fist bump. They sure liked it. So everyone wanted to do fist bump, fist bump, fist bump, fist bump. Yeah. Church. No.
Wondering about the red
Hindus from the community. But this was a community out in one of those farming villages that was not a persecuted church. But the Hindus and Christians and Muslims live right together. And for the most part, it's quite harmonious, actually. People aren't at each other's throats. So there's women in burqas and men with the caps on, and Hindus with the marks and dressed in traditional garb, and Christians, and they're not high-fiving each other, but it's life. That's community. So They get along for the most part. I don't know, particularly radiant were some of these little girls. They're so cute, maybe because I have 3 little girls. They're not little girls, they're big girls, okay, but yeah, I've had little girls, and wonderful. There still are some, sort of deep-seated, I don't know what the word is. The little dot and the painted-on eyebrows has to do with keeping away the evil eye. There's a lot of stuff about the evil eye in India, not amongst the Christian churches, but you'll see lots of demonic-looking faces posted over people's doors and businesses, and you think it means, oh, there's demons here. No, it's meant to scare away the evil eye and to put such a wicked face on the door that evil would be kept away. So it's some paradox and not contradiction, but something worth understanding in India. Some oppressive-looking things are meant to relieve oppression, but they wind up being oppressive. So Hinduism is a strange religion in that way. But so many bright faces there. This looks giant, but it's a bubble. So that's breakfast, by the way. That's called puri. It's Bishop David's favorite. A fried bread that just explodes, and then you tear it apart. They had lots of impressive-looking foods there. And if you think they're having a miserable time, this is one of the priest's daughters, and of course you can't hear the sound, but this is on the processional church. We don't quite do that here, but I will say, for a congregation that meets in a church this size, that's the roof, these are the walls, that's the door, there's barely electricity inside, it's hardly the size of this room here, and they don't bat an eye. They welcome the special guests, put them up front, have a cake. This church here is looking to purchase a piece of land and build a church that could accommodate more, but for now, that's church. What's the problem? Pretty inspiring, I would say. And as we're departing, this is Bishop Richard, his wife Sarita. No, that's his daughter Hannah Joy, who's 14, his wife Sarita, their son Aaron, who insisted on carrying our bags everywhere we went if we were royalty. So both Hannah Joy and Aaron wanted to carry our bags everywhere. This is their driver, Sheffy. And Sheffy has been the driver ever since Richard was a boy. They've been driving their family everywhere they need to go. So it's a different culture over there. He's been driving their family everywhere they need to go for decades. An amazing thing. This is Shankar, our driver. And we had a good time with him. And he's a Hindu fellow, and Sheffy's a Muslim. So we had the whole gamut as we're driving around. Just in case, if you wanted to know if it's true that there are cows everywhere. And you don't touch the cows, you feed the cows, you nourish the cows, but chickens, better look out, because there's chicken in everything. So, but no beef. Yeah. So that's the visit to India. A few minutes if you have any questions about what's going on with our churches. And yes, sure.
They don't have leaders and they're not doing is their service anything similar to what we have?
On Sundays we did have a service that was similar to what we have, but it's in Telugu, and you cannot really insist on 1928 American Prayer Book English Anglicanism. It just doesn't work. Even translating the Bible into Telugu doesn't exactly work. You can't have chapter and verse because the Telugu language doesn't work like English works. So if you get a Telugu Bible, it might be like John chapter 4, verse 1 through 3. And they had to take a part of verse 3 and make it part of verse 1, otherwise it wouldn't make sense in Telugu. So the same with the liturgy. They use a liturgy from the Church of South India that was established and has been revised. It's a pretty orthodox liturgy, but it's just not the same. They're not singing Western hymns. They're not, responding as we do, but they do respond. So it's hard to kind of describe. And Debbie, your question.
I was wondering what the temperature was when you were there.
Awesome. It was low in the high 40s, high in the low 70s. Perfect. It was great. You guys were suffering here. So, Ruth and then Susan.
I just thought I noticed some people carrying what looked like it might be a Bible. in
Yeah.
Some of the pictures.
Oh, yes.
Do they carry those openly?
Oh,
in
yes.
places?
Christians carry their Bibles. Yep. And yes, I'll just say yes. That's right. Susan? Right. Yeah, the school is established. It's not in the area of the churches. It's north of Hyderabad, and it would take, apparently, as I learned, a 3-day journey to go and visit that school, so that would knock out visiting several churches, so we skipped it. But yeah, OM is no longer really in India. They transferred into an organization called Good Shepherd, so it's a Good Shepherd school north of Hyderabad. It's still functioning. The APA still sponsors children to that school. And if you would like to sponsor a child, they don't use the word Dalit as much anymore. So that's a whole longer political conversation. But the caste system is still very, let's say central to India. And if you're low, and you're low for your life. You're registered as low caste, and you're not getting out of it. So, but we don't use the word Dalit anymore. So. Not much. Yeah, Sarah.
I'm just curious about how these churches got started. Were they the result of missionaries visiting? How did they become affiliated with APA?
Yeah, it's of course, I can't give you a sweeping answer for all those, partly because I don't always know the origin of a church, and partly because the stories are different. Some churches are established in the broader CSI, Church of South India, and then there's something that's gone askew in that church, and they come to us. Others evangelicals, but they don't want to be in the evangelical church anymore. They come to the Anglican church, and some of them are just church planters, Christians that go out and start a church. So those are the rough answers. But we're almost out of time now. But
Are any of these churches holdovers from the colonial people?
not these ones. This is South India. As I understand it, in North India, big, beautiful Anglican churches that people are scrambling to purchase the buildings and restore them. This is not that. That's my understanding. This is much more recent, much more, let's say, fledgling. These churches are like starting. So that's my understanding, and that's all we have time for. I have a much longer writing. It's posted in the hallway. It's going to be sent out to the province. It's roughly what I sent you out for a couple weeks, but it's been a little bit longer. If you want more information, ask. The end. Thank you. All right.